Should I start, Dr. Nitin? Good evening, everyone. I'll be talking about approach to pediatric solid tumors. Um,
Let's start, Dr. Monica.
yeah, I think my slide is not moving. Is it moving? Yeah. So now it is moving. I'll start. I'll be talking about approach to pediatric solid tumors. About 50% of the pediatric cancer of all pediatric cancers are seen. Solid tumors comprise of about 50%. Most of them are mesenchymal origin. And over last 3 decades, the outcomes have improved because of the chemotherapy agents which have come up and also the surgical techniques. For pediatric cancers, generally there are no potential causative agents, but there have been certain associations which have been seen. For example, like viruses, EBV is seen to be associated with Burkitt's lymphoma. In HIV, we see lymphomas, leukemias, leiomyosarcomas, and Kaposi sarcomas. Hepatoblastomas are seen to be associated with very low birth weight babies. And in tyrosinemia, hepatocellular carcinomas are found. So they are sometimes recommended to have earlier liver transplant. There are iatrogenic causes also, especially in the survivors who have received treatment like some alkylating agents. These patients, they develop leukemia. If someone has received radiation therapy for some treatment of malignancy or otherwise, there are chances of having breast or thyroid carcinomas or Hodgkin's lymphoma. In children who receive cranial radiation for brain tumors or retinoblastomas, they tend to have osteosarcomas or thyroid carcinomas later in life. Also, there are certain syndromic associations like a familial polyposis coli is associated with intestinal polyposis or in colorectal cancer. Familial retinoblastomas syndrome is associated with retinoblastomas and osteosarcomas. Wilms tumor is associated with Zager syndrome and Dennis-Strauss syndrome. Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome is associated with Wilms tumor, hepatoblastomas, and renal tumors. Then there's Leaf-Remini syndrome, which has seen to be associated with many multiple malignancies, and soft tissue sarcomas are common. Next is neurofibromatosis type 1 and type 2 and VHL. These are also associated with certain malignancies. So whenever you find any patient who's got some syndromic association, we need to follow up them for any because they might develop a tumor later in life. So we have to keep them under surveillance. Germ cell tumors, like undescended testes, there's 2.5 to 11-fold increase in having germ cell malignancies. Klinefelter syndrome, Swyer syndrome, and Turner syndrome, these are also associated with germ cell tumors. Most of the solid tumors, they're present with a lump. If they are externally, they can be externally visible. For example, if they are arising from soft tissues present outside. They can be incidentally diagnosed when the child has got a presence with upper respiratory tract infection and gets a X-ray done, and we see a shadow, or in a routine checkup when a pediatrician just palpates and finds some lump, and the patient is referred for further investigations. Sometimes the children, they present with compression symptoms. For example, if there's a spinal cord compression, they can be paraplegia. Large thoracic masses can cause SVC compression, superior vena cava compression, and abdominal masses can cause IVC compression, which leads to pedal edema. Sometimes they present in emergency in shock. So sometimes Wilms tumor or liver tumor, they rupture. So shock can also be one of the presentation. Sometimes, for example, there's a bone metastasis, the child might start limping. Neuroblastomas in the cervical ganglion, they are associated with Horner syndrome. Neuroblastomas also are secretory, so sometimes they also have increased blood pressure. So most of the time when the child presents to us with some lump or mass, we do a CBC. We need to include in here peripheral blood films to see whether there's any abnormality in the blood count. Then LDH and uric acids are done to see tumor burden, that is how much is the tumor lysis, and it will tell us basically whether the tumor is dividing rapidly or not. Then liver function tests and RF renal function tests. Most of the time we get an X-ray done, like I said, in chest X-ray, it could be incidental finding, or we might see pulmonary mets. Pulmonary mets are seen in Wilms tumor, hepatoblastomas, and certain soft tissue sarcomas. In a abdominal mass, if we get an X-ray done, we might see calcification, erosion of pedicles of spine, and displacement of paravertebral line. These features are seen in neuroblastomas. In germ cell tumors, specifically teratoma, we might see a chunky calcification in that. There might be a pathological fractures or bone infiltration, which is seen in disseminated neuroblastomas, and rarely in hepatoblastomas, osteoporosis is seen. For primary bone tumors, plain X-ray might show some malignant tumors like Ewing's, and a characteristic onion skin or sunburst pattern is seen. USG is generally a primary investigation whenever we find that child is having a lump. So it tells us whether the lesion is benign or malignant, and helps us to know what is the organ of origin. So it generally helps us in all abdominal masses, in the neck lumps. If there's a chest pathology on an X-ray, we might use sonography to see whether it is solid or fluid. In musculoskeletal system, it helps us to evaluate soft tissues, whether the mass is discrete, cystic, or vascular. There's one negative thing, that it is operator dependent. Next is CT scan. After sonography, we either do a CT scan or MRI. CT scans are generally preferred because they are quick, and most of the things are can be evaluated, like lungs, lung parenchyma, mediastinum, head and neck, abdomen, and pelvis. So generally, we require IV contrast for seeing all kind of malignant tumors. If we already have a local imaging, then to rule out lung mets, we can do on chest CT, and for ruling out lung mets, we do not need to give IV contrast. MRI better helps us to evaluate musculoskeletal system. So soft tissue sarcomas are better seen with MRIs. Central nervous system, so brain tumors are better seen with MRIs. This includes spine, head and neck tumors. So MRI is also good for abdomen, pelvis, and mediastinum, but it takes time, and most of us are we prefer doing a CT scan because it is quick, and we also can rule out chest CT in a same sitting. With MR angiography, we can evaluate tumor's proximity with the major vessels. Now we come with tumor markers. So there are various tumor markers raised in not all pediatric solid tumors have raised tumor markers. So first is neuroblastoma, where we see urinary catecholamine and its metabolites are raised. So urinary VMA is done for ruling out neuroblastoma. Others are lactic dehydrogenase and serum ferritin levels. They also tells us about the prognosis. I'll be talking about these three things later on. Tumor markers in hepatic tumors like alpha fetoprotein is raised in hepatoblastoma and hepatocellular carcinoma. Sometimes if it is an SCG secreting hepatoblastoma, beta SCG is also raised. For a fibrolamellar carcinoma, which is a variant of hepatocellular carcinomas, unsaturated vitamin B12 binding capacity is to be done. For germ cell tumors, serum AFP is raised in yolk sac tumors. Beta HCG is raised in choriocarcinomas. In embryonal carcinomas, some of them are raised, but both serum AFP and beta HCGs are raised, but the levels are not that high. In germinoma and teratomas, the markers are absolutely normal. Immature teratomas, there might be slight increase in serum AFP. So this was like to see to basically evaluate the thing, local local things which we do. Now I'll be talking about staging and metastatic workup. So nuclear scan, we have a bone scan which helps us to detect bone metastasis in neuroblastomas, osteogenic sarcomas, Ewing sarcomas, and bone metastasizing Wilms tumors. MRBG is helpful for diagnosing neuroblastomas and similar tumors. So with MIBG, it is actually very a sensitive scan. There's uptake is seen in primary and bone wherever the bone metastases are present. 10% of these tumors are non-avid in MIBG. MIBG can also be used for response evaluation. So once we give chemotherapy, if we want to evaluate what is the response, we can use MIBG again. And also MIBG therapy is done if there's a recurrence and we don't have any other options like chemotherapy or radiation left, MIBG therapy can be used at that time. The tumors who are not MIBG avid, like in neuroblastoma, PET scan is better. Then we'll require PET scan to see to do the metastatic workup. PET scan is also useful in detection of cancer and monitoring the treatment response. Tumors like neuroblastomas, soft tissue sarcomas, Ewing sarcomas, Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphomas are seen are where the PET scans are helpful. Generally, a PET scan is not required for Wilms tumors, germ cell tumors, and liver tumors. Guided biopsies. So when we are doing workup, when we have done local workup, then we have done tumor markers. And if we have tumor markers raised, then we don't need to do biopsy. We can see what marker is raised and we can plan treatment accordingly. But if there are no markers raised and we are not, and the imaging is not helpful, then we will require tissue diagnosis. So tissue diagnosis can be incisional or excisional. That would mean if we can remove the tumor, if it is a small soft tissue tumor and we can remove it completely, it is good. It is basically a treatment also. And incisional would mean taking out small tissue from the for diagnosis. So in locations like mediastinum or abdominal masses, we don't need to do open biopsies. We can use image guided techniques like using a sonography or CT guided biopsies. So that is more convenient. Sometimes there are scenarios like there's a calcified suprarenal mass with bone metastasis. So, and we can, in these places, we can aspirate bone marrow and see if the neuroblastoma cells are present. Now I'll be coming to specific tumors. So this is just a diagram, a pie chart showing what are the tumors. I will not be talking about leukemia, CNS, lymphomas. So solid tumors, most common is the neuroblastomas and renal tumors, liver tumors, retinoblastomas, and other germ cell tumors. This is basically not Indian thing, but in India, we most commonly see neuroblastomas and renal tumors and then germ cell tumors. So neuroblastoma, it arises from sympathetic nervous system, which is a system with tissue which is present along the in the adrenal medulla and in the paraspinal or periaortic region. So there's there's a varied clinical behavior of neuroblastoma. So it can be very benign, doing nothing to the patient, or it can be malignant, where it just spreads rapidly to bone marrows and other tissues and can cause a rapid progression and death. Most commonly, neuroblastomas arise from adrenal medulla, followed by mediastinum, paraspinal, neck, and pelvic region. So I'll be not talking about the mass effect, but other symptoms which are present. So in neck it can present with the mass and Horner syndrome. Thoracic, large masses can present with superior vena cava syndrome. Pelvic tumors can present with urinary dysfunction or constipation or fecal incontinence. Paraspinal tumors might have scoliosis, spinal cord compression with acute or subacute paraplegia. Sometimes in small children, infants, we also see skin metastasis, which is subcutaneous nodules, which are seen, but these basically tumors are good ones. They have good outcomes. Then the child who has a bone marrow infiltration in neuroblastomas, they present with anemia or thrombocytopenia. Uh, Orbital tumors, that is when there's a retrobulbar metastasis, periorbital ecchymosis is seen. Then there's some metabolic effects like hypertension, flushing, irritability, sweating, or diarrhea because of the catecholamine metabolites which are secreted. Certain paraneoplastic syndromes are associated with neuroblastomas. First is opsoclonus myoclonus syndrome, which is seen in 2.2 to 4% of newly diagnosed cases. There is rapid chaotic eye movement, ataxia, and myoclonus. These tumors have favorable outcomes, but there might be some neurological deficits which might persist for life. Then is VIP syndrome, which presents with diarrhea and hypokalemia. Both these syndromes, if we do surgery, the outcomes are good. This is one video of paraneoplastic syndrome. So child at presentation may be irritable with these kinds of movements. Okay, so this is another presentation of neuroblastoma. So this child presented with, it was 8 months old kid, presented with jaundice. Jaundice was there for like last 1 month and child had started vomiting for 10 days. So you can see this jaundice there. So somebody had, the patient was thought of having pancreatic blastoma, but when we did biopsy, it was neuroblastoma. So what are the diagnostic investigations? So like I said, 24 hours urinary VMA levels are required. And serum LDH levels are seen if they are more than 1500 international units, that shows poor prognosis. Similarly, if serum ferritin is more than 150 nanograms per ml, it shows poor prognosis. CT MRI is required for local imaging. In local imaging, we try to see what are IDRFs. IDRFs is like image-defined risk factors. Basically, these are risk factors if we operate upfront. For example, in neck, if the tumor is encasing carotid artery, vertebral artery, and internal jugular vein, it is a risk factor. If there's an extension to skull base, it is a risk factor. And if the tumor is compressing trachea, this is risk factor. So all these image-defined risk factors, if they are present, I'll be talking about staging later on. So image-defined risk factors are required to stage the disease. So if image-defined IDRFs are present, that is L2 disease. I'll tell you later on about this. Similarly, there are image-defined risk factors for every part where the tumor is present. Mostly these image-defined risk factors, they are basically telling us how much the vessels are involved and other important structures are involved. In a first photograph, which is like on the top left corner, we can see a small neuroblastoma. It is just close to IVC. This is not called as image defined risk factor because if we operate upfront, it should come out easily. Now the image on the right below, you can see that celiac artery is all, and this is all tumor. So the celiac artery and its branches are all encased in the tumor. So this is image defined risk factor. We cannot operate upfront. Now, workup may will lead a pathological diagnosis. So we'll do a image guided biopsy. Will require histopathology and will also require molecular pathology. In neuroblastoma, molecular pathology has got, I mean, this is the only tumor where the molecular pathology is got significant. is of significance in in knowing what is the prognostic outcome. So we do if there's anemic amplification and chromosomal aberrations like 11q loss and 17q gain present, the outcomes are poor. Staging, for staging, we required MIBG scan, PET scan, bone scan is optional if PET scan is done, if MIBG is non-evade. We also need to do bilateral bone marrow as aspiration and biopsies. So nowadays, if MIBG scan is showing uptake in bone marrows, then we can avoid doing bilateral bone marrow aspiration and biopsy to see metastatic spread to the bone marrow. So this is the pathological neuroblastoma classification, which shows us which is basically divided in two categories: the favorable category and the unfavorable category. I'll be not going into these details. Then we have risk groups, like I was talking about image defined risk factors. So if you have an if there are no image defined risk factors present according to the CT scan, which I just showed you earlier, it is called L1 disease. If there are IDRS present, it is L2 disease. If there is a distant metastasis, if there's a metastasis present, it is M disease. MS is a special category where the metastatic disease is in children younger than 18 months is there, with metastasis confined to skin, liver, and bone marrow metastasis. So prognostic factors are tumor stage. So clinical stage and age are the two most important independent prognostic factors for neuroblastoma. Age, if it is less than 18 months with disseminated disease, has a favorable prognosis. Infants, if they're less than 18 months, are more likely to have localized tumors. This INPC is like Shimada's classification. It categorizes patients in favorable and unfavorable histology based on degree of neuroblast differentiation, stromal content, and MKI and age. Cytogenetics, like I told, anemic amplification, DNA ploidy, and chromosomal deletions are required. This is neuroblastoma risk stratification system, which is modified. This is modified because we have not taken ploidies in this. This is basically Tata's system, which they are following up because ploidy is not available in most of the places in India. So we do risk stratification in almost all pediatric solid tumors to low, intermediate, or high is the most commonest thing we divide. This division is to decide what kind of treatment is required. So a low risk patient will require less chemotherapeutic drugs and less aggressive treatment, but a high risk patient will require aggressive treatment with more drugs and surgical resection. So treatment for low risk neuroblastomas involve surgery followed by observation. Chemotherapy with or without surgery is done for the patients who are symptomatic, like life-threatening disease. So like the picture I showed you of a child with jaundice. So jaundice is causing obstruction and vomiting. So it is kind of a life-threatening symptom. So these are the kinds of children. Even the child is of 8 months. He has got a favorable histology, but because he has got this life-threatening symptoms like jaundice and vomiting, we have to treat him. So we'll be doing chemo. We will be giving chemotherapy, and surgery will decide after chemotherapy's response whether we really need to do surgery or not, depending on the location of the tumor after the chemotherapy. Observation without biopsy can be done for perinatal neuroblastomas, which are very small tumors, and most of these are cystic tumors. So we basically need to observe them. So in observation, we'll be doing VMA levels and sonographies after every 1 month. So if these tumors post-birth, they keep on increasing in follow-up sonographies, then we need to intervene. It is seen that these perinatal neuroblastomas after birth, they generally resolve. But if they do not resolve, like they're increasing in size and the cystic component is becoming more solid, then we need to operate on them. Radiation therapy is rarely required in low-risk tumors. For intermediate risk tumors, we give chemotherapy and surgery. Chemotherapy cycles can vary from 4 to 8 cycles depending upon the biological results we get. Radiation is reserved for unresectable tumors. Stage M is a special category, like I told you. So observation with supportive care is required for asymptomatic patients which have favorable biology. If the child is symptomatic, like very young infants or those who have unfavorable biology, we can give chemotherapy. Sometimes these children also have like they have a small renal tumor with multiple liver mets, so it might cause abdominal compartment syndrome because of the huge hepatomegaly. There we might need to give chemotherapy or radiation to control the disease. Coming to pediatric renal tumors, Wilms tumor is the commonest, like most 90% of these tumors are Wilms tumor. Others are clear cell sarcoma of kidney, malignant rhabdoid tumor of kidney, renal cell carcinoma, cystic mesonephric nephroma, and PNETs. They present with renal mass. Hypertension can be seen in 25% because of the compression, mass compressing the renal artery, or tumor itself secreting the factors to cause hypertension. Coagulopathy is seen in 10% of the patients. Uh, so we basically need to evaluate for von Willebrand factor deficiency in these patients. Uh, Evaluation. Then we need CE, CT, chest, and abdomen for staging a mm, local disease. We need to decide whether we need to do upfront surgery or biopsy. So if a renal tumor on CT scan is if the surgeon finds that he can operate upfront, the surgery can be done upfront, or we need to keep chemotherapy and then do surgery later on. So there's certain recommendation when we do biopsies for renal tumors. It should be a retroperitoneal approach. It should be image guided whenever possible, and adequate biopsy course should be taken. Um, uh, so doing upfront surgery and giving upfront chemotherapy is because of there are various major study groups like SIOPL group, where they give chemotherapy, where they in SIOPL they do a biopsy, they give chemotherapy and then operate. In NWTS, that is the Americans group, they do upfront surgery and then they give chemotherapy. So there are certain conditions in NWTS, like a stage 4 disease or a very large tumor where the with the IVC thrombus, which is going into the which is going intraatrial into the heart. So these are the conditions where NWTS also gives chemotherapy first. So there are other groups like UKCC and a smart study by Tata. So whatever we do, whatever either we do upfront surgery or upfront chemotherapy, Wilms tumor, the results, the final outcomes and survivals don't change. There's on the left side there's a staging workup for SIAPL, and the other side is for COG. So they have two different these staging system because of the chemotherapy thing. To just this is just this is simplified version. If the tumor is inside the kidney, not going up beyond Girota's fascia, it is stage 1. If it is going beyond Girota's fascia, but it is in within the limits of this kidney, and it is removed en masse. Also, if there's a vascular invasion, but it is removed en masse, it is stage 2. So anything beyond beyond the margins of kidney, like this tumor is going outside Girotas, or the lymph nodes, or there's a vascular invasion outside, if the thrombus is divided when we are removing the tumor, it will become stage 3. And this is stage 4, where the metastasis is seen in lungs and livers and other places. Uh, so prognostic factors are stage, histopathology, whether it is unfavorable or favorable. Molecular markers are not being done for these renal tumors. Therapeutic treatment modalities are surgery, chemotherapy, and radiotherapy if necessary. Surgery is to be done through the abdomen transperitoneal approach. We need to palpate surface of liver surfaces, peritoneal surfaces, and lymph nodes are to be palpated. We should avoid any kind of tumor spillage, and sampling of lymph nodes are to be done. Even if the lymph nodes are not enlarged, they have to be sampled. So after we do surgical staging, a stage 1 favorable and or unfavorable histology and stage 2 favorable histology will receive 18 weeks of incretin actinomycin. Stage 3 patient, stage 3 to 4 with favorable histology will require 24 weeks of 3 drugs plus radiation, and stage 2 to 4 with unfavorable histology will receive 5 drugs, 5 weeks or 24 weeks of chemotherapy plus radiation. So wherever there's unfavorable histology or stage 4, we need to add doxorubicin, which is cardiotoxic, and radiation therapy also. So radiation therapy after surgery, radiation therapy ideally should be given within 10 to 14 days of surgery. Coming to liver tumors, so liver tumors can be primary or secondary. Primary, there are benign and malignant. Benign tumors include mesenchymal hematoma, adenomas, focal nodular hyperplasias, infantile hemangiomas, which can be focal, multifocal, or diffuse. Malignant tumors are hepatoblastoma, hepatocellular carcinomas, sarcomas, and rhabdoid tumors. And secondary could be because of neuroblastomas, Wilms tumors, germ cell tumors, or others. For hepatoblastomas, most of the hepatoblastomas present between 0 to 4 years of age, and hepatocellular carcinomas are on the higher side, higher age group, that is between 5 to 14 years of age. Clinical presentation, apart from abdominal lump, anemia can be present. Thrombocytosis is seen because of the increased production of thrombopoietin by the tumor. Rarely, early puberty is seen because of beta HCG or testosterone secretion by the tumor, or hypertension because of the renin secreting hepatoblastoma. Investigations required are serum AFP is raised in hepatoblastoma, then CECT is required. So if tumor markers are raised and the child is like between more than 6 months and 3 years of age, we actually don't need to do a tumor tissue biopsy, true cut biopsy. But if AFP is normal and there's a radiological dilemma, then we need to go in and do a biopsy. Most of the hepatoblastomas, they have AFP, which is raised. So for this hepatoblastoma, we have a pretext staging system where the boundaries of each section is defined by right, middle, and hepatic veins and umbilical fissure. So pretext means before giving any treatment, we are doing a pretext. We are seeing pre-treatment extent of disease. That is pretext staging system. So in the pretext one would mean that 3 contiguous sections are free of tumor. Like in this first picture, you see only one section is involved, and other 3 are continuous sections are free. Pretext 2 would mean 2 contiguous sections are free of tumor. Similarly, pretext 3 is like one contiguous section is free of tumor. So like in stage 3, you can see that this section is free and these 3 are involved. So there are various permutation combinations which are shown here. In addition, there's one in any group, like we have to see other, like this is the first part shows us the how many sections are included, but we have to see other things also. Like we have to see whether there's about the IVC, whether there's ingrowth in the hepatic vein or not. If the status of all 3 hepatic veins, status of portal vein, if whether there's any extra hepatic disease, whether it is multifocal tumor or not, whether there's any tumor rupture at diagnosis, any caudate lobe involvement, any lymph node involvement, or distant metastasis, because these things will make a patient high risk. So high risk stratification system will have patients who have serum AFP level less than 100 micrograms per liter. A pretext 4, that means all segments are involved, would be in high risk. A small cell undifferentiated subtype in pathology has got a bad outcome, so that will also come under high risk. Other things I've already told you about portal vein and other things, the other involvements which are there in pretext criteria. So treatment modality includes chemotherapy and surgery. Chemotherapy in a standard risk would mean cisplatin for 6 cycles. So after 4 cycles of chemotherapy, we do surgery, and then 2 cycles are given after surgery. Superplato is for high risk, where we give combination of cisplatin, carboplatin, and doxorubicin. So 10 cycles are there. So surgery can be done anywhere after 4 or 6 cycles of chemotherapy, and then the rest of the cycles are given later. So whenever we are giving chemotherapy, so we have to monitor AFP levels. So after every, before every cycle, we see the fall in the AFP. If anywhere we see that fall is not great, the log reduction is not there, we'll have to maybe upgrade chemotherapy or think of doing early surgical intervention if possible. Surgery is partial liver resection, depending on how many segments are involved. And if we cannot do partial liver resection, it would the liver transplant would be required. So if on the upfront scan we see that the the candidate is, I mean, the child might require liver transplant, then we need to coordinate with the liver transplant team soon, because this liver transplant thing, we need to evaluate patient for, like, we need 1 to 2 months to plan everything. The hepatocellular carcinoma is seen in older children. Hepatitis B has been seen to be associated with this, and and prolonged use of metabolic steroids. Pretext staging is going to be same, and chemotherapy is cisplatin, carboplatin, and doxorubicin, same as hepatoblastoma. And surgery is required after chemotherapy or before chemotherapy if the tumor is small. Undifferentiated embryonal sarcomas is seen in 5 to 10 years. There are two types. Either they arise from liver or from biliary tract. Uh, it has seen that it has been reported that there can be malignant transformation from a solitary liver cyst. They are basically invasive tumors. They invade into lungs, peritoneum, and pleural spaces. The chemotherapy is basically whatever soft tissue based chemotherapy, which is given in like vincristine, actinomycin, and cyclophosphamide combination, which is also used for soft tissue sarcomas. And then we need to resect tumor after chemotherapy. Malignant rhabdoid tumors are basically seen in kidneys, but they are also reported in other sites like CNS, liver, and other soft tissues. There are high chances that these tumors rupture, like 17% spontaneous tumor rupture has been seen, um, which is more frequent than seen with the other hepatic malignancies. So with AFP would be normal in this, and we need a biopsy to prove what a tumor it is. It requires multimodal chemotherapy, but the outcomes are not that great. So coming to germ cell tumors, germ cell tumors are broadly divided into malignant category and benign. Malignant are seminomatous germ cell tumors, which includes seminomas, which is seen in testes, dysgeminomas in ovaries, and germinomas in brain. Non-seminomatous germ cell tumors include yolk sac tumor, choriocarcinoma, embryonal carcinomas, gonadoblastomas, teratomas, and yolk sac tumors, and mixed histology. Teratomas are benign. They can be mature and immature. They generally grow in size and do not have a distant metastasis. Pediatric GCTs are seen in the most common site is gonadal, followed by pelvis, retroperitoneum, others, and mediastinum. Imaging is if we have done an X-ray, we might see calcification or obvious mass effect. USG to see what is the primary site. CECT abdomen and chest is done for local thing and staging for primary and metastatic evaluation. Sometimes in pelvic tumors, MRI is better. Also in sacrococcygeal sites, MRI helps us in evaluating better the pelvic in the pelvic location. Bone scan and MRI head is required for metastatic choriocarcinomas. Otherwise, we don't need this MRI brain or bone scan. The first picture on the left side is showing a pelvic mass. It is basically a pelvic GCT, which is, I mean, before chemotherapy. And the second image is showing a huge mediastinal germ cell tumor. Tumor markers are raised in germ cell tumors. I've already told this. So treatment would mean a surgery. Surgery is supposed to be a site-specific surgery with staging. Site specific would mean, like, if there we are operating a ovarian tumor, ovarian germ cell tumor, we need to remove the ovary, we need to do pelvic, we have to uh, stage the tumor locally. So we need to remove the ovary, we need to see if there are any peritoneal deposit, we need to see whether there's an ascitic fluid. we have to see the liver surface, and also we need to sample a lymph node. So that way, every site, there would be a staging workup which is required. Chemotherapy is cisplatin, etoposide, and bleomycin. B is written small because bleomycin dose is reduced for pediatric germ cell tumors. It is not like what is given in adults because of the complication like late effects of bleomycin, which is pulmonary fibrosis. So if the child is having renal compromise, which is commonly seen because of the large pelvic tumors, which are germ cell tumors, so we might need to give carboplatin, etoposide, and in these patients, we will require to give carboplatin. Radiotherapy is not useful in germ cell tumors. Again, the tumors are divided into low risk, intermediate, and high risk. So for a low risk tumor, only surgery is required. For an intermediate, surgery plus 3 cycles of chemotherapy, and high risk will require surgery and 4 cycles of chemotherapy. Now, coming to pediatric soft tissue sarcomas, so broadly they are rhabdomyosarcomas and, non-rhabdomyosarcomas, soft tissue tumors. RMSs are seen in younger age group, and older we see non-NRSTS. These are just few images. This first photograph is showing maxillary RMS. It was arising from the masseter muscle. This one is a soft tissue sarcoma of the thigh, and this one is at the back. So workup will require local MRI. MRI is helpful in parameningeal, paraspinal, and pelvic soft tissue sarcoma, or CT scan. Biopsy is required for most of the soft tissue sarcomas because when they present to us, they are generally in large in size. So upfront dissection with negative margins is rarely possible. So we need to do a biopsy. While doing biopsy, we need to be careful because when we are doing final surgery for the child after giving chemotherapy, we need to excise that biopsy scar also. So it is always preferable when if you are doing a biopsy for a soft tissue sarcoma, the surgeon is also involved. So he knows where he's going to take incision and during the surgery, he takes out that biopsy scar also. Staging for soft tissue sarcomas includes chest CT plus abdomen, or we can do bone scans and or bone marrows. So I've written hashes because if we are doing bone marrow, we don't need to do bone scans if bone marrow is positive. If for parameningeal RMSs, we require CSF. For any soft tissue sarcomas, we remove, especially in RMS, because there's high chances that lymph nodes are local lymph nodes might be involved. So lymph node sampling is done. Similarly, in soft tissue, like in other soft tissue sarcomas, we have risk stratification system here also. Risk stratification system involves a pre-treatment TNM staging, surgical grouping, and age and histology. TNM staging system is based on the site, whether the tumor is on the favorable or unfavorable site. I've mentioned below, favorable sites include orbit, non-parameningeal head and neck tumors, genitourinary tract other than kidney, bladder, and prostate, and biliary tract. These are the favorable sites for RMS. That means the outcomes are good. For parameningeal sites like middle ear, nasal cavity, paranasal sinuses, nasopharynx, and pterygoid infratemporal fossas, these are the unfavorable sites. So TNM staging systems includes the tumor site, T stage, size of the tumor, involvement of lymph node, and distant metastasis. This is just in details about the TNM classification. So surgical pathological, this is clinical group. When the patient comes to us, what is the clinical group? So group 1 would mean a localized tumor that is completely removed with pathologically clear margins and there's no lymph node involvement, which is rarely seen because we generally get patients who have a tumor size which is large. And group 2 is a localized tumor that is grossly removed with first thing, a microscopic disease at the margin, or it could be in margins can be involved with grossly, the lymph nodes may be positive. Group 3 is a localized tumor with gross residual disease after incomplete removal or biopsy, or we have just done a biopsy of the tumor. And group 4 is distance metastasis. Again, risk stratification is done into low, intermediate, and high risk. Low risk patients receive two drugs chemotherapy. Radiation can be avoided in good histology like embryonal RMS. In embryonal RMS, which are small, we can avoid radiation. Intermediate risk patients will require 3 drugs with radiation. High risk patients will require individualized care. If they have a metastasis, we might need to palliate them. So we'll have to discuss these things with the patient because the outcomes are not good. During the surgery, excision of the entire tumor should be done, if possible, without significant compromise of any form and function of the patient. Then the margins should be free. Biopsy mark should be included in the specimen. Specimen should be oriented. That means when we are removing, we need to mark which is the lateral margin, which is the superior margin. And we need to sample draining lymph nodes. The other category is NRSTS, which is heterogeneous collection of soft tissue sarcomas, which includes synovial sarcomas. They're huge numbers, but these are the common ones: synovial sarcomas, MPNSTs, epithelioid carcinomas. WHO classification would include synovial sarcomas, MPNSTs, epithelioid sarcomas, alveolar soft part sarcomas, extrarenal rhabdoid tumors, leiomyosarcomas, infantile fibrosis. So there's n number of soft tissue sarcomas which come under this category. So here we need to do metastatic evaluation, which will require CT scan of the chest and lymph node sampling. So all these non-rhabdos, so not all of these NRSTS things, they go to they have a lymph node spread. Synovial sarcomas, epithelioid sarcomas, clear cell sarcomas, they have been seen to have lymph node metastasis. Treatment is again gross tumor resection with radiotherapy is used if there are microscopic residual disease, and generally these tumors are chemo resistant. So most of the chemotherapy things, chemotherapeutic drugs don't work here. There are many more tumors which I could not take because I could not cover all of them in 1 hour. So most of the pediatric tumors, they have good outcomes. Diagnostic and staging workup should be followed for risk stratification, because that is really important to see how much chemotherapy or how much treatment has to be given. And time for local therapy, either it is surgery or radiation, should not be delayed. Thank you. Are there any questions from anyone? So I think there are no questions. So thank you everyone for listening to my talk. In case there are any questions, you can text me on WhatsApp also, or just let Dr. Nitin know. Thank you.